good morning, and good morning to you. Welcome to another edition of the Kitchings Table here on Awesome Radio, WBISLP 106.9 FM, Roku TV, GPAC 23, Facebook Live, and of course, you can always catch us on YouTube. This is Earl Kitchings, your host, and again, we're here to bring you some information. Hopefully, it sparks some interest in you as we prepare for school to reopen. And everybody I know across the country, school supplies, pack the bus, buy the backpacks, put everything in there, helping kids who can't normally get their school supplies in abundance because they may come from situations that don't allow them to have the economics to do that. But all in all, that's why I guess the thing of packing the bus and buying all these school supplies for kids has happened over the years. So as they prepare to pack the bus, or they've already packed the bus, in some states, I know here in Florida, they're giving no tax on school supplies for a week. Let's get ready for school because it'll be that time. But as we get all these school supplies, something crossed my mind that I thought I would bring to your attention, and it has to do with those things that are critical to us learning. And aside from books, they would be the tools that we need. Books are tools, but the tools we need to communicate. No, not your phone, not your computer. Before we had those things, the primary way for communication was verbal and written. And when we talk about writing, when we talk about the writing portion, it came to mind, well, what about writing? What about those tools that we use day to day to write down notes, write down papers, jot down problems to figure out things? We use a writing instrument several times a day. And when we think about that, the question becomes, what types of writing instruments do we like? But what is the history of the writing instrument? So I'm going to give you a brief history about the writing instrument. Then I'm going to give you a timeline. And something's going to jump out to you, I hope, about the timeline, because we've gone from the primitive to the sophisticated, even from the point of a writing instrument, now including the stylus, which is what we use to write on screens of our laptops or our computers or our tablets. So the writing instrument has a very interesting history. And it dates, it dates all the way back to 4000 BC. But let me give you the short, brief informational history about the writing instrument. And then I'll take you down the timeline so that you can have a feel for how this all has transpired over the last 4,000 plus years. Because again, if we did not have these tools, communication would have only been verbally, which means you can't document. And documentation is so key and important that when you document something and write it down, it stays with you a long time, or at least it keeps you from, some folks, not forgetting things, rebooting you to remember things, just a way to make sure that legally things are written down so that when it's time for the legal aspects to happen, it's documented. So a writing implement or writing instrument is an object used to produce writing. And of course, writing consists of writing letters, alphabets together that form words. So ancient Sumerians and Babylonians used triangular stylus. Interesting, they used a stylus to write in soft clay tablets, which would later be baked. So they would take out this stylus like a stick almost and write their letters to make messages. And let's just say the tablets probably were as large as the electronic tablets we use nowadays. I'm sure some were larger, depending on how much they had to write. Romans wrote in wax tablets with styluses, which allowed them to erase written text. So, with soft wax, you can just kind of rub it out. These methods, of course, had disadvantages. Clay tablets were heavy and brittle. They would break easily. You got your important information. Imagine writing down something very important. You're writing out a bill, and in clay, you bake it. It's nice and pretty, and you get ready to go somewhere, and you drop it, and it breaks. Wax tablets, again, not heat resistant. And so because of these things, there needed to be a new writing surface or a writing tool to write on. And, these pens, they found a way to use some type of pigmentation to give you ink. Egyptians created what we know as paper today, but papyrus. Back in the day, they created that out of reeds and wood, and they used reed pens, from a plant that grew kind of like a stalk, and they shaved off the end to make a fine tip, and they cut it, and it kind of had an open end, and you would dip it in the pigmentation and write. And it says here that writing is one of the most important inventions to humanity. First wonder of the world, writing, maybe. And like I said earlier, it allowed us to record history, documents, share information from place to place. So as time goes forward, inventions happen, things get better, improvements happen. Instruments and the techniques for writing improved. And of course, in China, they had their own writing instruments, and they used to carve their writings out of into turtle shells. So this transformation of communication writing, first you got to create the alphabets, then you got to make words that, so the whole process, words, writing, words, letters, all of that kind of come together at one time in order for you to communicate. So when did writing instruments first show up on the scene? It states that in around 4000 BC, and BC stands for before Christ, man scratches the surface of a moist clay tablet with a bronze or bone tool. More than likely a bone tool. I mean, animal bone, you break it, it gets a sharp edge, or it's dull enough to have a point, and you can write things. And, back in the days of ancient times, pictures were probably more so used than letters. So you had the imaging, they would draw pictures to, like a cartoon almost, to tell a story or to give out information. Then around 3000 BC, the Egyptians developed a form of writing with pictures. For writing on papyrus scrolls, scribes then use these thin reed brushes or reed pens. So the Egyptians are given credit for creating the paper and pretty much a pen. Then in 1300 BC, the Romans developed a form of writing, and they scribed onto sheets of wax, sometimes wooden tablets, used a metal stylus. And in Asia, they say they used a bronze stylus, which is a metal. So you think about metal as opposed to a reed, that's a plant. So, and then as writing on parchment, which is a form of paper, also tablets filled with wax for notes and for planning large books. So they started writing books. And they were probably thin books, or imagine, those tablets being, well, they went from with the parchment. So now you can get more information on a piece of parchment. So again, they wrote with metal or bone, and they could rub the words out as they needed to. Then between 600 and 1800 AD, which is basically after the death of Christ, Europeans found that writing on parchment with a quill pen altered the style of their writing. At first, they used capital letters all the time. So again, going back to alphabets. And that's a whole nother story, alphabets. But later they developed faster styles with small letters and quill pens. And for those of you who don't know what a quill pen is, a quill is the feather of a bird. And the larger the bird, the larger the feathers, which means the larger the quill. So imagine a goose or geese having those large feathers on their wings, so that when you got one of those, and whether if it fell out or you pulled it out, you cut off the tip to make it a sharp edge, and then you would dip it in some type of pigment like ink and write with it. So moving forward, 1790, pencil lead was invented in France and Australia. Pencil lead. So think about that. Pencil lead. Now, isn't it a fascinating thing when you get a wooden pencil to understand how they get the lead inside the pencil? And then when you sharpen it, it makes a fine tip with the wood, with the lead coming through, so that you shave away the wood surrounding it to give it a point. Pencil, very, very important writing instrument and tool that came along in 1790s. Then from 1800 to 1850, a metal pen point was patented in 1803, but it wasn't really used a lot, and what they call these are nibs. So the steel nibs became a little bit more common and used in the 1830s. And by the 19th century, metal nibs had replaced quill pens. So you have the metal nibs. And again, somebody has to make these items. Somebody has to take their time and formulate a way to make these items. And then after you make one, you have to replicate that one so that it can be more than one. And when you do more than one, imagine you created these pens with these metal nibs, and the king said, I need 20 of these. So you, as the craftsman, must now make 20 pens. Well, that's just for the royalty. What about the everyday common person? How do they get that writing instrument? So by 1850, the quill pen started to fade. Steel nibs started to fade, and a more improved tip made from a different type of metal. And what it says here is iridium, rhodium, and osmium. Osmium were the metals they started, because they needed to be a little bit softer, not something so hard and firm. Then in 1884, man is always working to improve something, a tool, a device, machinery, always constantly working to improving it, making it something that can be used easier for all mankind. So in 1884, Louis Edson Waterman, an insurance broker, invented the first proper fountain pen. Now, dipping the quill or the nib inside that ink well or into the ink and letting it kind of collect there. But now this guy's come up with was a fountain pen that holds the ink and it, flows out as you write. That's basically what a fountain pen was. And it was more liquid than anything. I mean, that pigmentation, basically black, looks like purple at times, but that's what happened. So from 1888 to 1916, the ballpoint pen came about, and John Loud is given credit for this. And in 1916, Van Vestenriesberg, probably a German or somebody from Scandinavian descent, they improved these writing instruments to come out with these ballpoint pens. So that's what the world was using. That's what countries were using. That's what people were using. And it went on for 30 years. Basically, 30 years, this was what was going on. And then in the 1940s, the modern version of the ballpoint pen was invented by Joseph Lazio and George Burrow. 1943, the first commercial pens like this were used. And when it says commercial, that means made in bulk for everyone to get. And they were more rugged, and the sales of these pens just took off during World War II. And it was because the military needed writing instruments to document so much things and so many events that happened on the battlefield that they needed these writing instruments. Sure, a pencil is good, but that pen is more permanent. So then in October of 1945, the ballpoint pen was introduced to the U.S. market. And the first pen to write underwater had been given an unsatisfied demand, as some 10,000 were sold at Gimbel's department store in 1945. But that's when the ballpoint pen came to America. Now, in our pantry section today, I'm going to give you some information about probably the most iconic name in writing pens. The most iconic. I mean, and the story, as I read it, was fascinating how it came about. So in 1953, an inexpensive ballpoint pen was designed and made by this French baron, a French baron named Bic. And he developed this industrial process for manufacturing ballpoint pens that lowered the unit cost dramatically. I mean, the price went way down. As opposed to it being $12 to $15 or more for you to get that writing instrument, he came up with a way to create this ballpoint pen, and everything just scaled down. You could get it very inexpensively. So his name was B-I-C-H. B-I-C-H. That gives you a hint as to what writing instrument we're going to talk about in our pantry segment. And then in 1960, or starting in the 60s, a fiber type writing instrument with a felt pen created by the Tokyo Stationery Company in Japan. Papermate's Flare writing instrument was the first felt tip pen to hit the U.S. market in the 60s, and it's been at the top of the leaderboard ever since. And these felt tip manufacturers have branched out. You use them. You see them in your highlighters. You see them in other things that you use, the Sharpies. So it started with one thing. You start an idea, somebody has a better way to make it better, and they spin off their company. So this thing has just taken off since the 1960s, these felt tip pens. So we got the felt tip going on after the ballpoint, and then we get to the 80s, and then a new pen comes out. The roller ball pens. And they were made in the early 80s, and unlike the conventional ballpoint pen that used thick ink, they employ a mobile ball and liquid ink to produce a smoother line. Rollerball. You ever thought about how small that ball is at the tip of those pens? And how much time it took to invent the ball and the part of the pen that holds the ball, so that half of it is exposed for writing, and then making it just right so the proper amount of ink flows down to the ball so it writes continuously and smoothly. There's so many things that have been made in this world that we don't even think about the technical aspects of it. But the next time you take out your pen, before you start writing, just look at it and think about a ball bearing, because that's basically what the point of a ballpoint pen is. It's a ball, a very, 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 very small ball bearing that's placed in the point of a metal tip with an opening in the end that allows that ball to go just far enough and fit just right so that it doesn't fall out, and it allows that ink, as you are writing, that ball rolls around, letting the ink come to the ball and write. So that's what happened in the 1980s and 90s. The roller balls came about, and man, have they had a boom here in not only the United States but around the world. And then in the 1990s, rubberized writing instruments, where you got a rubberized grip so you can grip the pen better. That took over for a while. And then finally, from 1997 to now, ring pens, as they call them, pens designed to write without gripping the pen with 3 fingers. So, most times when we write, let's see if I can. So when we write with, the thumb, the index finger, and the middle finger. So now, I guess you can write. Well, I don't know. I don't know if you can write it like that, or they say you only need to use 2 fingers to use these without gripping the pen with 3 fingers. So however that works, but that's kind of the timeline on the writing instrument. From a bone to some 6,000 years ago to what we have now. Felt tip, rollerball instruments. What a transformation. And where would we be without these writing instruments? A lot of communicating probably would not have been done. And let's not forget, the pencil is still one of the most important writing instruments in the world, simply because that lead in that wood, or for mechanical pens, that lead is the critical part of a pencil, the lead that makes a letter or letters or image on paper. Lead is very soft and very fragile, but it still does a great job for writing. And when you think about all the pencils you've ever had in your life or used, and of course, the pencil and the eraser go hand in hand. So when you think about all of those things, and how they've been important in our lives and how we use them day to day, how you will use them today in something that you will have to do. Just think about that. And then think about the fact that paper started out from the first writing surface you could write on was clay, and now we have paper. And paper, not from reeds, but from trees. And that whole process of taking a tree and making paper is another phenomenal thing. And how much paper is produced annually, used annually, recycled and reused, and how paper is made into other things, boxes, packaging, an abundant use of a tree for more than just paper. So, but the writing instruments and the paper, that those things go hand in hand. You can't write on clay anymore. You can't write on wax. You need something soft to absorb the lead or the ink, and it does it in a very fine way. And you continue to use that product on a regular basis. So think about those two things, writing instruments and writing surfaces. And then think about styluses from an electronic standpoint, how they were able to create an electronic device that allows you to take something that looks like a pen, that is a writing instrument, but it's called a stylus. And the stylus was something used a long, long time ago. But today's stylus has a rubber tip where you can write on these screens. You can write, draw, do whatever. Still a writing instrument, writing on a writing surface. Electronically or just pen to paper or pencil to paper, still needed to be used for a way to communicate. That's what this is all about, communications through these particular tools. This is the Kitchings Table, heard every Tuesday and seen every Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Awesome Radio, WBISLP 106.9 FM, Roku, GPAC, Facebook Live, and YouTube are the other platforms where you can catch our show. I'm always happy to be with you, and we are so grateful and thankful that the folks over at Awesome Radio have given us an opportunity to bring our thoughts and ideas and information to you. And I want to tell you that I'm challenged at times to want to bring you more current news to discuss, but I have to step back from that at times because it can either be so either aggravating, so depressing, so enraging, so enlightening, so informational. I mean, it's a complex feeling from current events going on and looking to find the positive things. So not so much the negative, but it's just one of those things where not to always just bombard you with the current events of the day or the week, because I'm sure if you are an astute listener and watcher of things going on in the world, in your hometown, in your state, it becomes a little bit much. And I don't want to bring more all the time because it's definitely out there to talk about. But sometimes I just feel that bringing you some things to give you some enlightenment or information or just something that opens up the conversation about something you could talk about and ask someone a kid, about something that you never thought about, because everything that has been man-made requires thought, thinking, creating, production. It requires all those things. And as humanity, as society, as a civilized world in this day and time, and at times you have to wonder how civilized we are based on some of the decisions that are made, many of them driven by money. It becomes really convoluted. It's hard to see clearly because everything is not as clear as people tell you they want it to be. It's interesting how the word transparent and wanting to be transparent about things is shaded. But anyway, we want to bring you as much as we can each and every Tuesday here on the Kitchings Table. And we love bringing you things like we're doing today, in addition to information about things to keep you informed. And of course, as we move the needle toward the end of the year 22, just know that in the next 90 days, things are going to get heated up as it relates to politics and other things in this country. A lot of stones are going to be thrown and a lot of dirt is going to be kicked up. But that's discussion for another day. Our topic today is the writing instrument here on the Kitchings Table. And I'm your host, Earl Kitchings. And today, just wanted to bring you some information about something you use every day and probably take for granted. That thing you write with, a pencil or a pen, felt tip, rollerball, ballpoint, pencil. It doesn't matter. They all do the same thing. They allow you to communicate by writing letters which form words, which make sentences, which make statements and comments. And thank your teachers back in elementary school for giving you the teachings of how to write letters so that you can spell words, that you can write sentences, so that you can have paragraphs that make common sense when you're communicating with someone else. Thank them. So we're talking about writing instruments today. And as I stated in this section of our show called The Pantry, which is always just kind of a different way to bring you some information, we call it, or just our segue to the next part of the show. We open up with a segment, then we get to the pantry. And sometimes the pantry is short, sometimes it's not, but it's all part of the show. And we're glad that you're with us today. So the pantry section today is, I'm going to share with you about the writing instrument, one in particular, where it came from and how it came about. But we're talking about writing materials. And I can remember being in school when your teacher would tell you to take out a sheet of paper and your pencil for a quiz, to do your vocabulary words or to do some quick math problems. And you had to have those in order to get it done. And writing materials refer to the materials that provide the surfaces on which we as people use for writing, to inscribe messages or other things. Also can be used for symbolic things, drawing, painting. It has a variety of uses. Canvas is used by artists. Paper used by writers. Laptops used by IT people. So it varies depending on what you're trying to relay from a communicative standpoint. So writing materials, envelopes, office materials include these things: ink, notebook, notepad, notepaper, pencils, envelopes, stationery, pen and paper, writing paper, letterhead, office supplies, recycled paper, writing pad. All these things are what we would call writing materials, something where we can scribe. And that's what they used to call people who did all the writing for royalty back in the day, scribes. Someone to write for you. You dictated You speak it, they'll write it. And they want it written accurately. So, they say paper was first made in China. And it said that it's kind of a mix of mulberry bark, hemp, and rags with water, mashed into a pulp, pressed out the liquid, and hung the thin mat to dry in the sun. Li Yang, China, by Shay Lun, Chinese court official, is given credit for making paper, whereas the Egyptian used papyrus. Chinese came up with paper, but all in all, it's from ancient days. So, this has been around a long time, and the instruments you use today are just an ongoing process of someone creating something and fine-tuning it, tweaking it, making it better. So now, let's talk about the most iconic writing instrument known to mankind. By name, not by so much it being the instrument, but by its name. Because once this writing instrument came out and it was given this particular name, it's been known by this name for 60, 70 years almost. So here's the history of the BIC, B-I-C, the big pen, and how it came about and why we have it. Because that clear cylinder with the plastic tube filled with ink that leads down to the brass point with the ball in the end, with the cap on the top and the cap to cover the pen. If it was a blue cap and cover, it was blue ink. If it was black, it was black ink. It was red, red ink. If it was green, green ink. Primarily blue and black. But when I was in school, man, if you had a big pen, man, that's like having an expensive pen, like having one of those $200, $300 fountain pens. I mean, you were really, really hot stuff. You had a big pen because they wrote so well and so smooth. And, of those, you didn't start using those basically until you got to like junior high school, 7th grade, I would think, when, you elevated from just always using a pencil to now you have to use a pencil and a pen. Your teachers require that you turn in their work in ink with a pen, write it in ink. So when your parents bought you your school supplies, man, you had to have some ink pens, but not just any ink pen. You had to have that big ink pen. That was such a cool pen to have, man. I mean, even to this day, I think it's one of the coolest writing pens to have. So after obtaining the patent rights to a ball pen created by Hungarian inventor Marcel Beek, this pen was introduced in December 1950, and it was touted as being a reliable pen at an affordable price. And he called it the BIC. The BIC, a shortened and easy way to remember his name. BICH is pronounced BIC. So when he came out with this writing instrument and he called it a BIC, I'm sure many of you never knew what that BIC, because when you see it, it always is written out in capital letters, BIC, BIC. Well, here you have the rest of the story. BIC is short for BICH, Marcel Beek, who invented this pen. So before that, you had this company called the Reynolds International Pen. They introduced the modern pens back in 1945, tiny ball bearing instead of a point. And it guaranteed that you didn't have to refill it. That was the purpose of this instrument that Mr. Bic invented. You don't have to refill it. The ink is there. And when they used to write on paper cloth, the Time magazine hailed it as probably one of the most important inventions of mankind. So it got a lot of play. And again, writing instruments back in those days before Mr. Bic invented this big pen, anywhere from $12.50 back then, they compared that to being about $170 today for these new pens. And, they talk about the amount of pens that were created and invented. So while this Frenchman set up a business, created this pen, became the pen company to the world, the popularity of that pen grew to the point where he added plastic pen barrels, started making his own pens. Then he started making retractable tips, mechanical pencils, even started making lighters, the big lighter, Bic, B-I-C-H, pronounced Bic, B-I-C. And what was then 19 cents, and that was the other thing when I was coming up, those pens only cost 19 cents. So 19 cents back in the mid to late 60s is valued at $2 today. So, you got 50 cents, you basically could get 3 pens. You got $1, you got a supply of pens to last you the whole year. Now, interesting enough that your classmates, when they saw you pop out that big pen, just like when they're looking for that lunch money, they ask you, what? Can I borrow your pen? Now, you know how pens are in this day and time. And there are people who will do this consciously and subconsciously, but they will do it. And you have to be mindful of who they are, because that writing instrument, whether it be a cross pen, a Waterford pen, those very expensive pens. I'm trying to think of the name as I'm talking about it. The black pens with the white tip on the end. Those very, very, very expensive writing instruments, man, you guard that with your life. Somebody says, can you borrow a pen? Now, for those people who have those very expensive pens, this is what they would do. They would carry 2 pens. One they would let you write with if you ask for a pen. That other expensive writing instrument, $200-300 pen, they would never share that pen. And if they did, they would stand right there until you finish writing. And once you finish, they would put their hand back out to get their pen back. They value those pens just that much. So there are people who are pen collectors. Now, there are probably a couple of levels of pen collecting. And people who just like to get pens for the sake of having pens, I don't think I would want to really say they are pen collectors. How about I say pen gatherers? Because they're just gathering pens. They see, when people give away pens, free pens, man, people just grab pens as if pens are going out of style. They got to have that pen. No big deal. I mean, they're very inexpensive, because when you order things in bulk, the price of them get very, very inexpensive. But those very expensive pens, and I'm saying a cross pen, the gold pen or the silver pen with the name cross on it, very, very nice writing instruments. You cherish those. You're very careful about who you let use those, whether it be the pen or the mechanical pencil. You're very careful about who you let use that pen. But that plastic pen that you don't really care anything about, or the stick pens as they call them, which is a cheaper version of the big pen, that cheap stick pen, you don't really care. But it's funny how, anything that's free, people don't care what it is. If it's free, they want it. And pens are one of the most intriguing things people want when they are free. Free pens, man, people are, if they can grab 5 or 6 of them at a time, they'll do it. So my question is, are you a collector of pens and or pencils? Do you collect them? Do you have like a box somewhere where you based on what's on them or the shape of them or something like that, do you collect them? Pens or pencils? Mechanical pencils? Regular pencils? If I ask the question, what's your favorite pencil by brand, would you tell me the Dixon Ticonderoga? That, the yellow pencil, the green metal part that holds the eraser. I don't know what they do about those pencils, but man, those are the best pencils in the world. And you got to have that number 2 pencil with the lead in it in order to, write certain things. And interesting enough, mechanical pencils are pencils where, man, you press the button and the pencil lead comes out, but that soft lead snaps off those things so frequently, man. It's like, so you really don't need but a little bit coming out in order to keep it going, because otherwise it's going to break off. Now you got to push the button on the top, click out some more, till you got to change, put in a new lead. But that's the beauty of a mechanical pencil. You get the leads and put them in. But when it's time for these school supplies that kids are now getting, give them pencils. Please give them a pencil sharpener so they can sharpen their pencil. Now, I've come to learn that, the one thing that kids wear out on a pencil is the eraser. Man, they make a mistake, man, they erasing for days. And that's an interesting thing to see kids with pencils and when they make mistakes. And you have to teach them that if you make a mistake, just cross through your mistake and keep writing. Now, when I was doing technical drawings, the professionals that I worked with, they gave me this mindset. Now, for children, they would say they messed up, they did something wrong. For those mechanical minds who do those technical drawings, they wouldn't so much say they made a mistake or they messed up and erased. They would just say, you need to make a correction. Not a mistake. I need to make a correction. And they would basically I had an electric eraser. I know you might be like, an electric eraser? Yeah, it was electric because it was connected to a cord, and the eraser was about this long. It's like a retractable pencil lead. You take the eraser, put it inside this electric eraser. It was a white color eraser. And then when you need to make a correction in your mechanical drawings, you take out so that you're not just, doing that motion, you take out that electrical eraser and you just let it erase. Now on paper, it's like erasing on paper, but we had this film that we would draw on with ink, mechanical pens that came in different nib sizes to let out a different flow of ink, wide to thin. And you had to dampen that eraser just slightly to get that ink off that Mylar film. It will come off so easy, and then you could redraw on that Mylar with that ink over and over and over and over again. Now, that would be sometimes I would draw in pencil and then come back and trace over it in ink. Ink was permanent because once it got on that Mylar, it dried and it was basically there. So when we talk about collecting pens and pencils, I hope you're a collector. If not, you don't have to become one, but be mindful of the people who see your pen and want your pen. They see, oh, that's a nice pen. Yeah, be careful of those people. When they say that, they got their eye on your pen, and if you're not careful, they'll use it and they'll do the old soft move on you. Especially for men, if they're wearing a jacket, they take that pen and then they'll put it in that inside coat pocket. So be mindful of people who like your pens, but especially people who like your pens that are value to you because they got their eye on it. So this has been the Kitchings Table today here on Awesome Radio, WBISLP 106.9, Roku, TV, GPAC, Facebook Live, and YouTube. I'm your host, Earl Kitchings. And as always, we are glad to be with you, and we hope that we have provided something additional to your day, something knowledgeable, something informational, something you can always pause and ask, Until next Tuesday, I'm going to say goodbye, and I hope you have a great week. And remember, COVID is still out there. Stay safe. So until next time, bye-bye. Have a great week.